one advantage of it being a miserable day out as I walk home from dropping my car off to get my mandatory exercise is that I more or less have the streets to myself, I guess. Been reading a bunch of Raymond Chandler novels lately, and I just finished The Long Goodbye a few days ago, and then watched the movie last night. And Farewell My Lovely and The Big Sleep are his best known Philip Marlowe novels. I don't remember having read A Long Goodbye before, but I really, really loved it. It's very complicated. There's so many different elements. I suppose ironically or not, or unironically, it is a bit too long to tie up all the pieces. But it kind of keeps you guessing for a lot of it. I never really knew where it went or where it was going. And it's the best part about the Raymond Chandler novels with Philip Marlowe are just that massive payoff you get as he kind of reveals all the things people have done to him. And there's a lot of times it's not about who he talks to and what they say, but it's about what they're trying to do to him. So he'll be like, well, this person's trying to warn me off it. What exactly is happening behind the scenes? And there's always like this payoff as he reveals his conclusions. That's so satisfying, and it's such an amazing relic of the 50s. There's also some really amazing points in this where he is letting people like Roger Wade or even Terry Lennox, like they spew all this stuff to him and talk about themselves and all these things. And he's just like, you're an asshole. And they're like, I like you for telling me you're an asshole. Which is kind of good because he doesn't judge them, but he will get fed up with people. Eileen Wade, Roger Wade, Terry Lennox. He's like, you are just such an asshole. Do you know that? And they'll kind of understand it and respond to it in a way that's like very, very satisfying. You don't see that very much in novels. And a million times I've thought about how in the Philip Marlowe novels, people always corrupt people always rat on him for being poor. But his ability to turn down money is his moral, ethical code and his purity. And time after time after time, the offer of money and what he does with it is basically his litmus test for his own, for essentially his own morals, to repeat myself. And it's just so interesting to see it happen again and again and again. And that is with the $5,000 bill, which I guess would probably be like a $50,000 bill now, is just like this perfect metaphor for how the movie goes and how everyone just kind of knocks him around, especially in Hollywood, which I think, or most of California, which can be a pretty oppressive place money-wise in a lot of ways. So there's an amazing sequence with the father of the murder victim, who's like this massive American oligarch, which is deeply satisfying and one of those moments where you realize that things haven't really changed that much. Like in the past 10 years, everyone thinks about the news and what it's like and the tone of it. And I think depending on who you are and what things you've gone through, your sort of opinions on those things may have changed one way or the other, being more essential or being more exploitative. It doesn't matter. But then seeing this guy from the 1950s who owns newspapers talk about what he thinks newspapers are and what their incentive structure is, and you're like, oh yeah, okay. Sometimes you think that what you are experiencing is new, but maybe there's not really anything new under the sun at all. And that was just one of the most satisfying moments. Truly. Sorry, I'm crossing the road here. And then last night, after having finished the book about 4 days ago, I watched The Long Goodbye by Robert Altman, which is from 1970, sometime in the 1970s. And it has Elliot Gould as Philip Marlowe. I remember watching it back in the day, having not read the book and being dumber. And I was like, this is fine, I guess, but the Marlowe's sort of weird. He's like a 70s goofball in a lot of ways. But having realized that this movie is written by Lee Brackett, who also has been a very, very, very long time, very successful screenwriter, and now having read the book so recently, I have to say it would be an impossible task to cut down that book with how much happens into a normal 2-hour feature-length movie. Movies were way more often 90 minutes to 120 minutes, like in the 70s or 80s or before. Now every movie feels like it's 2.5 hours. Oh, it sucks, man. And so I have to say, to get to the essence of what the book was about in terms of who is a bad actor and who is a good actor, I think they did about as good a job as you could. It's actually kind of a sort of a small miracle to turn a book that's that long and that complicated with so many storylines into a movie that's less than 2 hours that basically covers all the gists of it while changing enough that you're surprised and that they're not just like leaving some ties severed. And I thought Elliot Gould was really good, honestly. And to update those things for the 70s worked pretty well. I'm not really saying anything totally like new or mind-breaking about it, but I do think he did quite a good job of kind of keeping up like you need a narrator or you need an internal narrative to do a Philip Marlowe novel as a book, as a movie basically. But to have him as sort of like a self-mumbling, sort of lonely stoner in a way that's sort of more mild and softened by the decade, as is kind of like in some ways a softer decade than the 50s, I thought it was a lot better than I thought it would be. It's jazzy, it's a little bit goofy, it's funny, but I think it still honestly did a really, really good job of updating it for 20 plus years after the book came out. But what's interesting now is I think that if someone would do The Long Goodbye again, it would be simpler and a little more trite to again kind of update it for a modern audience and set it now 50 years later in 2025. But have you ever thought about how like the even years like 2020 or 2025 or something like that are easy to remember? It's so much easier to remember that it's 2025 than it would have been like 2023 or something. Part of that's sort of like the COVID time warp blur. But this is one of those years where it's easy to remember which one it is, I guess, because it's sort of one of those milestones. Anyway, I don't think it would be as interesting to I don't know, who knows. But to me, it would be more interesting to make the movie or show, it'd probably be a longer series, kind of like Ripley, a relic of the 50s and to show it as it is, like, I don't know, like tired cliches and sort of like low-level racism included, and be like, boom, look at this, make your own judgment, rather than it would be interesting to try to ape the Altman method and to try to update it for 50 years later from when this novel came out, when the movie came out, 70 years after the novel came out. And I think it's kind of valuable. I think it'd be kind of valuable to think that there's so much stuff in this with the Chilean house help and just like the treatment of, I don't know, I was going to say the treatment of women, but it's not that really like that key to the book. This is sort of one of those like default things to think about for that era. But I think, especially the change like inflation, how much like just like our idea of like what things cost changes, the $5,000 bill, to bring those things into relief compared to now, I think is a more striking thing, even if maybe it's not too appealing to that many people. I'd like to see it.